Rowan Quinn had 4 minutes to convince someone that she was worth saving. 4 minutes before hypothermia would shut down her remaining cognitive function. 4 minutes before her body would stop shivering and start the quiet slide toward unconsciousness that street kids recognize as the beginning of the end. February 10th, Saturday morning, 8:43. The temperature was 28 degrees, but the wind chill made it feel like 18. The kind of cold that turned breath into foam and skin into ice. She sat against the brick wall outside Riverside Roastery in Cincinnati, back pressed to frozen stone, knees pulled to chest, arms wrapped around her torso trying to trap what little warmth remained in her 98-pound frame. The oversized navy hoodie she wore was men's extra large, cuffs frayed, a burn hole on the right sleeve where she'd gotten too close to a warming barrel 3 weeks ago. The fabric did almost nothing against Ohio winter. Her pink high-top sneakers were held together with safety pins and duct tape, the original laces long gone, replaced with cords she'd scavenged from a dumpster behind a hardware store. The soles were worn so thin she could feel every crack in the concrete beneath her. Every ridge, every imperfection. 17 years old, 5'4", 98 pounds, but looking closer to 14 because starvation does that. Makes you smaller, makes you disappear, makes you the kind of person others step over instead of seeing. She'd been sitting here for 3 hours, trying to absorb warmth through a discarded coffee cup she'd pulled from the trash. The cup was empty now, had been empty for an hour, but it was something to hold, something to wrap her scarred hands around, something that made her look almost normal instead of completely desperate. People streamed in and out of the artisan coffee shop like she was invisible, which she was to most of them. Saturday morning rush meant families, couples, friends meeting for lattes and pastries and conversations about things that mattered in their comfortable lives. Not one of them made eye contact with the skeletal girl against the wall. Not one of them saw her. Rowan had learned that being homeless meant becoming a ghost, present but not perceived, occupying space without acknowledgement. She'd been on Cincinnati streets for 9 months, 273 days of being invisible, of understanding that society had built walls around certain kinds of suffering to protect itself from having to witness it. The cold worked its way deeper into her bones, past skin, past muscle, settling into marrow. She'd had pneumonia for 3 weeks, could feel it in her lungs when she breathed. The wet rattle, the way each inhale scraped like broken glass. Doc at the free clinic 2 weeks ago had given her antibiotics, 3 days worth. Told her she needed 2 weeks of treatment, plus rest, plus nutrition, plus warmth. All things that didn't exist on the street. Rowan had taken the 3 days of antibiotics, then watched the pneumonia come back angrier, deeper, more determined. Her left wrist ached, the old break that had never healed right. 11 months ago, Garrett Ford had grabbed her arm and twisted until bone snapped. The sound still lived in her nightmares. That wet crack, then the white-hot pain that had made her vision go black at the edges. He'd told her it was her own fault, that she shouldn't have tried to leave the basement, shouldn't have tested the locks, shouldn't have made him angry. He'd never taken her to a hospital, never had the wrist set properly, just wrapped it in an ace bandage and locked her back in the storage room that had become her prison. The bone had healed crooked, left her with limited range of motion and constant aching pain that got worse in cold weather, which meant it never stopped hurting anymore. Rowan pulled the sleeves of her hoodie down over her hands, tucked her chin against her chest, closed her eyes and tried to remember warmth, tried to remember her mother's kitchen. Laurel Quinn standing at the stove making pancakes on Saturday mornings, the smell of butter and maple syrup, the way sunlight came through the window and painted everything gold, the sound of her mother's laugh, bright and genuine and safe. 14 months since Laurel died, since the car accident that wasn't really an accident, even though everyone called it that. 14 months since Rowan's entire world collapsed, since Garrett Ford transformed from her mother's boyfriend into her guardian, her jailer, her nightmare. Rowan opened her eyes, blinked away the memory. Memories were dangerous on the street. They made you forget to stay alert, forget to watch for threats, forget that survival required constant vigilance. A young couple walked past, maybe mid-20s, matching winter coats. North Face, expensive. The woman carried a Starbucks cup, even though they were walking into Riverside Roastery for more coffee. Excess, comfort, choice. Things Rowan barely remembered. She made eye contact with the woman, tried to look non-threatening, tried to look like someone worth acknowledging. The woman's gaze slid past her like she was part of the architecture. Her boyfriend pulled her closer, protective, as if poverty was contagious, as if acknowledging suffering might somehow make them vulnerable to it. Rowan had tried asking for spare change 4 times that morning, had been rejected 4 times. Each rejection cutting deeper than the last because hope was the most dangerous thing to carry when you were homeless. Hope meant you still believed things could get better, that someone might help, that you mattered. The first rejection came from that young couple, the ones with matching coats. Rowan had approached carefully, voice soft. "Excuse me, do you have any spare change? Just trying to get something to eat." They'd pulled away like she carried disease, like her poverty might transfer through proximity. The man had shaken his head, said sorry without meaning it, without even slowing down. Walked past her into the warmth of the coffee shop while Rowan stood in the cold, dismissed, invisible. The second rejection was worse. An elderly man in a wool overcoat and leather gloves. Someone old enough to remember when America took care of its vulnerable. Old enough to have lived through times when neighbors helped neighbors. He'd looked at Rowan, really looked. Seen her hollow cheeks and 2 large clothes and desperate eyes. Then he'd turned to the barista inside, pointed at Rowan through the window, mouthed words she couldn't hear but understood anyway. Is she allowed to be here? Speaking about her in third person, treating her like a problem instead of a person. The barista had come outside, asked Rowan to move along, said she was making customers uncomfortable. Rowan had moved, walked 20 feet, sat down in almost the same spot, because where else was there to go? The third rejection was a college student, maybe 19, textbook open on the table visible through the window. Social work, the irony so thick Rowan could taste it. A girl studying how to help vulnerable populations, learning theories about poverty and intervention and systemic failure. But when Rowan knocked on the window, held up a hand in a small wave, mouthed please, the student had looked up, made brief eye contact, then looked back down at her textbook. "I'm studying, I can't help you." Hadn't even fully lifted her head, just dismissed Rowan's existence without breaking her reading rhythm, reducing a living, breathing, suffering human being to an interruption, an inconvenience, a paragraph in a textbook instead of a person standing in the cold. But the fourth rejection, that one had shattered something Rowan didn't know she still had left to break. The church group, 4 women in their 50s and 60s, all wearing matching t-shirts, Faith in Action Ministry, bright blue with white lettering. They were inside the coffee shop, visible through the window, sitting at a large table covered with papers and schedules, planning something, organizing something, talking with animated gestures and genuine smiles. Rowan had overheard fragments through the door: homeless outreach, winter shelter project, how to help people in need. They were literally planning an event to help people like her, discussing strategies, comparing notes, preparing to make a difference. The irony burned hotter than the cold. Rowan had waited until they came outside, approached the group carefully, made herself smaller, non-threatening, voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, I heard you talking about shelter programs. Do you know if there's any space available? I've been trying to get inside for weeks, but everything's full." The leader, a woman with gray hair cut in a neat bob and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, had looked at Rowan with an expression that combined pity and judgment in equal measure. The kind of look that said, "I see you're suffering, but I'm quite certain it's your own fault." "Honey," the woman's voice had been gentle, patronizing, the tone you'd use with a child who didn't understand consequences. "Handouts don't help. You need to take responsibility for your choices. God helps those who help themselves. You can't just expect people to fix your problems for you." Rowan had stared at this woman, this member of Faith in Action Ministry, who was planning a homeless outreach event, while telling an actual homeless person standing in front of her that asking for help was wrong, that her suffering was a choice, that divine assistance required meeting some threshold of personal responsibility that Rowan apparently hadn't achieved. The other women in the group had nodded. Agreed. One had added something about the importance of work ethic. Another had mentioned a nephew who pulled himself up by his bootstraps. They'd created an entire narrative about Rowan's life without knowing a single true thing about her, without asking why a 17-year-old girl was on the street in February, without wondering what had happened to put her there. They'd walked past her, back into the warmth of the coffee shop, left Rowan standing on the frozen sidewalk, alone, dismissed, judged, found wanting by people whose literal ministry was helping the vulnerable. The sound of the coffee shop door opening had saved Rowan from having to respond. She'd backed away, retreated to her spot against the brick wall, wrapped her thin arms around her torso, made herself smaller. Because that's what you do when the world makes it clear there's no space for you. You try to take up less room, try to be less of an inconvenience, try to disappear. That's when Ivy Brooks stepped out of Riverside Roastery, 16 years old, dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing jeans and boots and her father's Hells Angels leather jacket. She'd borrowed it that morning because the February cold was brutal and her own coat was at her friend's house. Cole had laughed when she put it on, said it looked better on her anyway, called her Mija, kissed her forehead, told her to be careful. Ivy took 3 steps onto the sidewalk, coffee in hand, breath misting in the cold air. Then her face changed, went pale. Her free hand came up to her chest, pressed against her sternum. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattered on the icy concrete, brown liquid spreading across frozen ground like blood. Rowan saw it happen in slow motion. The way Ivy's eyes went wide, confused, scared, the way her knees buckled, the way her body tilted forward, momentum carrying her down. No time to catch herself, no time to break the fall, just gravity and terror and the sickening sound of a human body hitting concrete. Ivy went down hard, head bounced, leather jacket scraped against ice. Her ponytail came loose, dark hair spread around her head like a halo. She didn't move, didn't cry out, just lay there, still, too still. And around them the Saturday morning crowd froze. 20 people, maybe 30, all with phones, all with cameras. Within seconds, half of them had devices out, recording, filming, documenting, bearing witness through screens instead of with their hands. No one moved to help. No one dropped to their knees. No one called out. They just stood there, creating a circle, a perimeter, a barrier between themselves and the suffering in front of them, watching through phone cameras like it was a show, like Ivy's life was entertainment, content, something to post about later. Rowan understood something in that instant, something about how the world works, about how people can witness tragedy and still choose comfort over courage, about how easy it is to film someone dying, how much harder it is to touch them, to help them, to risk yourself for a stranger. Her oversized sneakers scraped concrete as she scrambled to her feet. The shuffle became a sprint, 40 feet covered in seconds that felt like hours, her backpack bouncing against her spine, her broken wrists screaming, her lungs already fighting pneumonia, burning with every breath, protesting, demanding she stop. But she couldn't stop. Rowan dropped hard to her knees beside Ivy. The impact sent pain shooting up her thighs, ice soaked through her jeans instantly. Her hands were already moving into position, already checking, already assessing. Her mother's voice clear in her head after all this time. Laurel Quinn, ER nurse for 15 years before the car accident. Before Garrett killed her for insurance money, Laurel, who'd taught Rowan CPR at age 12, who'd made her practice on a dummy until the movements were muscle memory, who'd said you never know when you'll be the only one who can help. Rowan checked for breathing, put her ear near Ivy's mouth, watched for chest rise. Nothing. No air movement. No sound. No motion. She checked for pulse. 2 fingers on Ivy's carotid artery. Pressed. Waited. Counted. Nothing. No heartbeat. No blood flow. No life. Someone call 911. Rowan's voice cracked, hoarse from disuse and cold, and shouting that no one ever heard. But her hands were already moving, already lacing together, already positioning on Ivy's sternum, already beginning the compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rhythm her mother had drilled into her, the beat of staying alive. Stupid song, ironic song, perfect tempo, 100 compressions per minute, 30 compressions, 2 breaths, repeat, don't stop. Don't ever stop until help arrives or the person breathes. 30 compressions at the right depth means your arms burn, means your shoulders scream. For someone Rowan's size, malnourished, weak, already sick. It meant pushing past limits she didn't know she had. It meant breaking herself to save someone else. After 1 minute, her vision started to blur. Pneumonia making her lightheaded, making her lungs work overtime for oxygen her body desperately needed. After 2 minutes, she tasted blood, bit her lip without realizing, focused so hard on keeping rhythm that pain became irrelevant. After 3 minutes, tears started streaming down her face. Not from sadness, from sheer physical effort, from knowing she had to keep going, had to maintain effective compressions, had to save this girl whose name she didn't know. The circle of phone cameras around her felt like judgment, like spectators at an execution, recording her desperation, recording her failure. Because Ivy still wasn't breathing, still wasn't responding, still lay there lifeless under Rowan's scarred, shaking hands. 4 minutes. Rowan's arms felt like they were filled with broken glass, every compression sending shards of pain through her shoulders. Her broken wrist was on fire, the old fracture protesting, threatening to give out. But she couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. 5 minutes. Someone in the crowd said she's been doing that too long. Someone else said, where's the ambulance? No one offered to help. No one offered to take over. They just watched, filmed, waited for the outcome like it was a show with commercial breaks. 6 minutes. Rowan could barely see. Sweat and tears and pneumonia blurring her vision. Her rhythm was slipping. Compressions getting shallower. Less effective. Her body shutting down, demanding she stop, demanding she surrender. But Rowan had learned something in 9 months on the street, in 14 months of surviving Garrett Ford, in a lifetime of being the girl no one saw. She'd learned that surrender was death, that giving up meant disappearing, that sometimes the only thing between life and obliteration was pure, stubborn refusal to quit. 7 minutes, her voice came out broken. Please, please don't die. Please, I can't. I can't watch someone else die. The words were prayer, plea, promise. Everything Rowan had left condensed into 8 syllables. Because she couldn't save her mother, couldn't stop Garrett from killing Laurel, couldn't prevent that car accident that wasn't an accident. But maybe she could save this girl, this stranger, this person everyone else was content to watch die through phone screens. 8 minutes, Rowan's compressions were barely adequate. Her arms shaking so badly she could barely maintain form. Her body screaming, her consciousness threatening to shut down. She was drowning, suffocating, dying herself, but her hands kept moving, kept pressing, kept fighting. Then Ivy's chest jerked. A gasp, wet and desperate and beautiful, air flooding back into starved lungs. Her eyes flew open, unfocused, terrified, confused, but open, alive, breathing. Rowan sat back, shaking, sobbing, hands covered in coffee stains and sidewalk grit. 8 minutes of CPR, 2 minutes longer than most people could maintain effective compressions. She'd pushed past every physical limit, past exhaustion, past pain, past the point where her malnourished body should have collapsed. Sirens in the distance, growing closer, help finally arriving. But Rowan had already provided the help that mattered, had already refused to walk past, had already chosen to kneel on frozen concrete and fight death for 8 minutes while everyone else just watched. Then a sound drowned out everything else, a deep, thunderous roar of a motorcycle engine being pushed to its limits, growing louder, closer, urgent. Cole Brooks's Harley-Davidson exploded into the parking lot, 6'2", 240 pounds of leather and tattoos and protective fury. He was off the bike before it fully stopped, Marine training taking over, combat medic instincts assessing the scene in one sweep, his daughter on the ground, oxygen returning to her body, color coming back to her face, paramedics just arriving, and this skeletal teenage girl sitting on frozen concrete looking like she was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Their eyes met, Cole had seen wounded people before, in Fallujah, in Ramadi, in field hospitals where boys barely old enough to vote bled out on canvas stretchers. He knew what survival looked like, what it paid all, what it left behind. This girl had survived something, multiple things. The kind of trauma that hollowed you out and left only the core. The essential self, the part that refused to die even when dying would be easier. Cole moved slowly, deliberately, the way you approach something wounded that might bolt. Dropped to one knee in front of Rowan, never breaking eye contact. Then he shrugged off his leather jacket, his own Hell's Angels cut visible underneath. Patches earned over 20 years. And he draped his jacket around Rowan's shaking shoulders. The jacket was huge on her, warm from his body heat, smelled like leather and motorcycle exhaust, and something Rowan had almost forgotten existed. Safety, protection. The promise that someone bigger and stronger was choosing to shield her instead of harm her. You saved my daughter's life. Cole's voice was steady, calm, the voice of a man who'd made promises in war zones and kept them. You're safe now. Rowan couldn't speak, could only stare at this man who looked like every stereotype of danger her entire life had taught her to fear. Tattoos covering both arms, scars across his knuckles, a road name like Reaper that should have terrified her, Hell's Angels patches that society said meant violence and crime and threat. But he'd given her his jacket, positioned his body between her and the crowd still filming, made eye contact, direct, steady, unwavering, saw her, actually saw her, not as a problem or an inconvenience or a ghost, but as a person, as someone who mattered. Then Cole did something that broke Rowan completely. He placed his right fist over his heart, then extended it toward her, palm up, the biker sign of deepest respect, of blood debt, of honor that transcended words. Thank you, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you for not walking away. From the stretcher where paramedics were loading her. Ivy reached out weakly, her hand found Rowan's, squeezed, oxygen mask fogging with each breath she wouldn't be taking if not for this stranger. Thank you. Ivy's voice was muffled by the mask, barely audible, but clear enough. Thank you for not walking away. Rowan's notebook fell from her backpack as a paramedic tried to help her stand, pages covered in handwriting, her mother's handwriting from years ago, CPR instructions, anatomy notes, medical terminology, and newer entries, dates, times, conversations documented word for word, evidence carefully preserved because Rowan had known one day it might be the only proof she had. Cole noticed the medical knowledge, the careful documentation, the way Rowan moved, favoring her left wrist, the shallow breathing of someone fighting lung infection, the way she flinched when the paramedic touched her shoulder. Small movements, instinctive, the reflex of someone conditioned to expect pain. What's your name? Cole asked quietly, gently, not demanding, just asking. Rowan, her voice barely above a whisper. Rowan Quinn. Cole nodded once, absorbed the information. I'm Cole. My brothers call me Reaper, and I need you to understand something. You saved my daughter. That means you're under club protection now. That's not charity. That's blood debt. You understand? Rowan shook her head. Didn't understand. Couldn't process what was happening. 9 months on the street had taught her that good things didn't happen to girls like her. That kindness was always conditional. That safety was an illusion. That the moment you started to believe someone cared was the moment they proved they didn't. You're coming with us, Cole continued. To the hospital. You need medical attention. Don't argue, I can see it. Pneumonia, malnutrition, that wrist, and then you're going to tell me who hurt you, because I can see that too. The rope burns on your wrists, the way you flinched, the fact that you're 17 years old and sleeping on streets in February. I can't. Rowan's voice cracked. I can't go to a hospital. They'll call him. They'll send me back. Who's him? Rowan looked at Cole, at this man who just sworn protection to a stranger, at his daughter on the stretcher breathing because Rowan had refused to give up, at the notebook in Cole's hands with her mother's stethoscope tucked inside, the only thing she had left of Laurel Quinn. And she made a choice, the kind of choice that changes everything, the kind that means you stop running and start fighting, The kind that requires you to believe that maybe this time someone will actually listen. Garrett Ford, my mother's boyfriend. He was supposed to take care of me after she died. Instead, he locked me in a basement, starved me, broke my wrist, spent my inheritance. And I heard him on the phone 3 weeks before I escaped, saying that by spring I'd be gone, that accidents happened to kids on the street. The words came out in a rush. 9 months of silence breaking like a dam. Every secret, every horror, every night in that basement, every day of hunger, every moment of terror condensed into sentences that couldn't capture the full truth but tried anyway. Cole's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists, but his voice stayed steady, calm. How much inheritance? $180,000 from my mom's life insurance. I'm the beneficiary, but he's the trustee until I turn 18. That's in 9 months, November. He's already spent most of it. 127,000 gone. And if I die before November, he gets what's left. Cole stood, pulled out his phone, made a call that would change everything. Priest, it's Reaper. His voice had shifted. Military command, sharp, focused. I need every brother within 200 miles at the clubhouse. Now, a pause. The voice on the other end said something Rowan couldn't hear. We've got a minor, 17, escaped from abuse. Guardian spent her inheritance and is waiting for her to die on the street so he can collect the rest. She just saved Ivy's life. Another pause. Longer. Yeah, every single one. Cole looked at Rowan, made eye contact, held it. That's all it took, because that's what brotherhood means. That's what blood debt requires. When one of your own needs protection, when someone who saved your daughter's life needs saving themselves. You don't ask questions. You don't debate. You mobilize. Within 30 minutes, phones across Ohio were ringing. Text messages flying. Emergency call-outs going to every patch member. Every prospect, every brother who'd ever worn a Hell's Angels cut. The message was simple, clear, urgent, clubhouse. Now, blood debt, minor needs protection. At University of Cincinnati Medical Center. Rowan sat in an examination room wrapped in Cole's jacket. The leather still warm, still carrying his scent, still making her feel safer than she had in 14 months. Drasha Sloan Nash worked gently, documenting injuries, taking photographs, noting everything with careful precision. Severe malnutrition, untreated pneumonia, partially healed fractures. BMI of 14.8, rope burn scars consistent with prolonged restraint. Rowan, Dr. Nash said quietly, you're dangerously underweight. Your body is starting to shut down. Another month like this. She didn't finish, didn't need to. The implication was clear. Another month and Rowan would become a statistic. Another homeless kid who didn't make it through winter. Another tragedy people would film on their phones instead of preventing. The wrist, Cole asked from his position in the corner. Silent until now, watching, processing. Broken 11 months ago, Dr. Nash examined it carefully. Never properly set, healed incorrectly. She'll need surgery eventually to correct it. But right now we need to address the malnutrition and infection first. And the rope burns. Dr. Nash met Cole's eyes, consistent with prolonged restraint. Weeks, possibly months. The skin shows repetitive trauma. This wasn't a single incident. This was systematic, sustained, deliberate. Cole nodded once, pulled out his phone again. This time he called someone different, someone whose road name was Bones, Warren Hale, former Cincinnati police detective. 20 years on the force before retiring early. Too much corruption. Too many good cops forced to look away from bad ones. He'd left the department, but he'd never stopped knowing how to build cases, how to gather evidence, how to make charges stick. Bones, I need you at UC Medical now. And bring wire. We've got a case to build. 30 minutes later, Warren Bones Hale walked into that examination room. 52 years old, still carried himself like a cop, moved like someone who'd spent decades reading people, assessing threats, determining truth from lies. Behind him came Finwire Grant, 28, youngest patch member, former Army intelligence, could pull digital evidence from devices people thought they'd wipe clean, could trace financial transactions through shell companies and offshore accounts, could find the truth buried in data that most people didn't even know existed. Rowan told her story again. this time with more details. The progression of abuse, the system failures, the moments when someone should have intervened but didn't. I called CPS 8 months ago. Rowan's voice was flat, reciting facts because emotion would make her fall apart. They came to the house. Garrett showed them a fake bedroom, not the basement storage room I actually stayed in, showed them forged homeschool records. The caseworker said everything looked fine. Case closed. Caseworker's name. Bones was writing everything down. Legal pad, pen, old school documentation that couldn't be hacked or deleted. Robert Hayes. And you tried to file a police report. Rowan nodded. 6 months ago. Went to District 1 station. Told them I was being held against my will. The officer called Garrett. Garrett showed up with documents, said I had behavioral problems. History of lying. The officer told me to stop wasting police time. Sent me back with him. Her voice broke. The punishment for that attempt was severe. Bones and Wire exchanged looks. They knew what that meant. Knew the pattern. Abuser establishes credibility. Victim tries to get help. And system sides with abuser. Victim gets punished. Cycle deepens. Hope dies. And the financial aspect. Wire asked, you mentioned inheritance. Rowan pulled her notebook from her backpack. The pages waterproofed in a plastic bag. Years of living in uncertainty had taught her to protect what mattered. Inside were dates, times, conversations she'd overheard, bank statements she'd photographed before escaping, insurance documents she'd copied. My mom died 14 months ago. December, car accident, single car collision. Garrett said it was ice on the road, but the accident report said it was 45 degrees that night. No ice. And her brake lines were severely worn, even though the car was only 3 years old. Jesus, Wire breathed. The insurance policy paid out $180,000. To me, Garrett is trustee. I found bank statements showing he's withdrawn $127,000 so far. Paid off his mortgage, bought a truck, paid gambling debts. There's about $53,000 left. Rowan flipped to a specific page, her handwriting careful despite circumstances. Despite writing by streetlight, despite cold that made her fingers barely functional. 3 weeks before I escaped. I heard him on the phone, late at night. He thought I was asleep in the basement, but the air vent carried sound from the kitchen. She read verbatim. Every word burned into memory. Garrett said, yeah, I know it sounds bad, but the money's almost gone anyway. She turns 18 in November, then I lose control of the whole thing. No, I'm not suggesting. Look, accidents happen. Kids on the street overdose, freeze to death, get assaulted. If something happened naturally, the remaining $53,000 goes to me as next of kin since she has no family. The room went silent, heavy, the kind of silence that happens when evil stops being theoretical and becomes real. When you realize someone actually planned another person's death, calculated it, waited for it. Rowan continued reading, voice mechanical now, disconnected, because feeling the full weight of those words would destroy her. Then Garrett said, it's not like with Laurel. That was actually an accident. This is just letting nature take its course. I stop feeding her. I make winter hard enough. She either runs or gets sick. Either way, it solves itself. By spring, this is done. Memorial service, sad story about troubled teen, and I can finally move on with my life. Bones closed his notebook, looked at Wire, then at Cole. We need Priest. This isn't just about protecting Rowan. This is about making sure Garrett Ford never sees daylight again. Cole nodded, looked at Rowan. You said your birthday is in November. When exactly? November 3rd. 9 months. That's how long you need to survive. To get your inheritance back. To be legally free of him. Cole leaned forward, made sure Rowan was looking at him, made sure she understood. Rowan, I swear on my daughter's life. On the breath you just gave back to her. That man will never touch you again. You're under club protection now. That's not charity. That's blood debt. We protect our own, and you just became one of ours. You understand me. You're not alone anymore. He extended his hand, large, scarred, covered in tattoos. The hand of someone who'd hurt people, who'd fought wars, who looked dangerous. But Rowan had learned something in 8 minutes of CPR in 9 months on the street, in a lifetime of being unseen. She'd learned that danger doesn't always look like what you expect, that the people society fears are sometimes the only ones willing to fight for you. Slowly, Rowan placed her thin, scarred hand in Cole's calloused, tattooed one. He gripped gently but firmly. His other hand covered both of theirs. On my honor as a father and a brother, you're safe now. And for the first time in 9 months, Rowan believed that maybe she could be. What Rowan didn't know, couldn't know yet, was that 50 miles away? Lennox Priest Barrett was reading Cole's text message. The club president, 58 years old, former Army chaplain turned Hell's Angels leader, a man who'd lost his own daughter to domestic violence 15 years ago. Jessica, 23 years old, beaten to death by her boyfriend while neighbors heard screaming and did nothing. Priest had spent every day since making sure no other child suffered that fate, making sure his brotherhood stood for something, making sure protection meant more than patches and motorcycles and reputation. He read the message twice, then stood, walked to the center of the clubhouse, and made an announcement that would ripple across 3 Ohio chapters. Brothers, his voice carried authority, quiet but absolute. We have a 17-year-old girl named Rowan Quinn who just saved Reaper's daughter's life. She's been on our streets for 9 months, running from a man who was supposed to protect her. A man who's stolen her inheritance and is actively waiting for her to die so he can keep the money. A man who killed her mother for insurance money and is now planning to do the same to her. The room went quiet. 40 men, all wearing their cuts, all waiting. This isn't a request for volunteers. This is a mobilization. I want every brother from Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, ready to roll by dawn tomorrow. We're going to investigate Garrett Ford. We're going to build a case that puts him in prison for the rest of his miserable life. And we're going to make sure Rowan Quinn survives to see her 18th birthday. Priest looked around the room, at men who'd fought wars, who'd lost people, who'd chosen brotherhood over everything else, at men society feared. Men with records, men with reputations, men who'd made mistakes and spent years proving they were more than their worst moments. All in favor. For a moment, nothing. Just the ticking of the clock on the wall. The distant sound of traffic outside. The weight of what was being asked. Then every single hand went up. Not a moment's hesitation. Not a single dissenting voice. 40 men voting unanimously to help a girl they'd never met. Because that's what the word brother really means. That's what blood debt requires. By midnight, text messages had reached every chapter in Ohio. By 2 a.m., brothers were loading trucks, preparing bikes, making arrangements. By dawn, the largest coordinated mobilization in Hell's Angels, Ohio history would begin. 180 motorcycles, 3 chapters, 1 mission. Protect Rowan Quinn, destroy Garrett Ford. Prove that justice doesn't always come from badges. Sometimes it comes from leather and chrome, and men who understand that protecting the vulnerable is sacred duty. And it all started because one homeless girl refused to walk past someone who needed help. Because Rowan Quinn had learned from her mother that you act when you're the only one who can. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to kneel on frozen concrete and fight death for 8 minutes while everyone else just watches. Garrett Ford had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed Rowan was alone, that she'd die invisible on streets where no one cared, that his plan would work because the system had already failed her 4 times. What he didn't account for was that sometimes the people who look most dangerous are exactly the ones who will burn down hell itself to protect an innocent. And the Hells Angels were about to teach him that lesson in ways he'd never forget. Dawn broke over Cincinnati at 6:47 a.m. on February 11th. The temperature had dropped overnight to 15 degrees. Ice crystallized on power lines. Windows fogged with condensation. Breath turned to vapor the instant it left your mouth. And from 3 different directions, thunder began to build. Not weather. Engines. The rumble started low, distant, like a storm rolling in from the horizon. Then it grew, deepened, became a roar that shook windows on Thornhill Drive and set off car alarms for 6 blocks in every direction. 180 motorcycles converging on a single address. Garrett Ford's house, 2847 Thornhill Drive, Oakley neighborhood, suburban, quiet. The kind of place where nothing bad ever happens because everyone minds their business. Where people wave to neighbors and complain about snow removal and never ask why the girl who used to live at 2847 hasn't been seen in 9 months. The formation rolled in like a military convoy. Disciplined, tight, practiced from years of riding together. They came in waves, Cincinnati chapter first, 40 bikes in perfect formation, then Columbus, 38, then Cleveland, the rest. All wearing cuts, all carrying the same patches, all united by a single purpose: protect Rowan Quinn, destroy Garrett Ford. The bikes parked in precise rows along both sides of Thornhill Drive, engines cutting off in waves until only silence remained. The sudden quiet after all that noise feeling heavy, expectant, dangerous. 180 men standing there, not moving, not shouting, simply present. A wall of leather and ink in controlled power, making a statement without saying a word, making it clear that the girl Garrett Ford had tried to disappear now had an army. Lennox Priest Barrett stood at the center, 58 years old, silver beard trimmed neat, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. Former Army chaplain who'd counseled soldiers through hell and back, who'd lost his daughter Jessica 15 years ago to a boyfriend who beat her to death while neighbors heard screaming and did nothing. Every case since then had been personal. He looked at the brothers assembled. Cole Reaper Brooks on his right, the man whose daughter started all this. Warren Bones Hale on his left, ex-detective with 20 years of knowing how systems work. Finn Wire Grant behind them with equipment bags full of forensic tools. And Sloan Doc Nash, the club's only female officer. ER nurse who'd worked with Laurel Quinn years ago, recognized the stethoscope immediately. Everyone clear on the mission, Priest's voice carried authority without volume. This is an evidence operation. We're not here for vengeance. We're here to build a case so airtight that Garrett Ford spends the rest of his life in a cage. We do this right. We do this legal. And we do it so thoroughly that every system that failed Rowan has to answer for it. Heads nodded, grim faces, men who understood the assignment. Bones, Wire, you're on documents, financial records, digital evidence. Everything Rowan documented plus everything you can pull legally. Doc, medical liaison, coordinate with Rowan's doctors for testimony about her physical condition. What it indicates about prolonged abuse. Priest paused, looked at Cole. Reaper, you're with me. We're going door to door on the street, collecting witness statements from neighbors who saw things and said nothing. From people who heard screaming and chose comfort over courage. We document everything. Every failure. Every moment someone could have helped and didn't. The operation began with the coordinated efficiency of men who'd ridden together for years. This wasn't a mob. This was precision. Military discipline applied to civilian justice. Wire approached Garrett's house first. Not to break in. That would poison any evidence. To document. He walked the perimeter with a camera, photographing everything. The basement window so small a cat could barely fit through. The padlock visible on what should have been a pantry door. The new Ford F-150 in the driveway. $43,000 worth of Rowan's inheritance sitting there. Gleaming. Expensive. Bought with money stolen from a girl who was starving on the street. Meanwhile, Bones knocked on 2845 Thornhill, the house directly next door. Dorothy Patterson answered. 67 years old. Lived there 12 years. Hair in curlers. Bathrobe wrapped tight against the cold. Her eyes widened at the wall of motorcycles lining her street. Mrs. Patterson. Bones showed her his old detective credentials. Technically expired, but most people didn't check. I need to ask you some questions about your neighbor, Garrett Ford. Dorothy's hands shook as she gripped her doorframe. I don't want any trouble. Ma'am, the trouble already happened. We're just documenting it now. Did you ever hear anything concerning from Garrett's house? Any sounds? Any incidents involving Rowan Quinn? Dorothy looked past Bones at the assembled brothers, at 180 men who'd come because a girl needed protection, at faces that looked dangerous but eyes that held something else. Purpose. Determination. The kind of focus that comes from knowing you're doing something right, even if the world thinks you're wrong. The girl. Dorothy's voice cracked. His stepdaughter, I think. I heard her crying late at night. Sometimes she'd be screaming, and then it would just stop. Suddenly, like someone had, like he'd. She couldn't finish, didn't need to. The implication was clear. How often? Bones wrote everything down. Legal pad, pen, documentation that would hold up in court, weekly, maybe more, for months. I thought about calling someone, police, CPS, someone. But Garrett is so respected. Deacon at church, coaches youth soccer, and I didn't want to make assumptions, didn't want to accuse a good man of something if I was wrong. Did you ever see Rowan once, maybe 8 months ago? She was getting mail from the mailbox, so thin, bruises on her arms. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but then Garrett came out, put his arm around her, smiled at me, took her back inside. The way she moved, though, like she was expecting to be hit. Bones wrote everything down. Mrs. Patterson. Rowan has been homeless for 9 months, living on the streets. Garrett told everyone she ran away. But the truth is she escaped. He was starving her, locking her in a basement, stealing her inheritance. Did you ever suspect? Dorothy's face crumpled. Tears now, real remorse. I knew something was wrong. I knew. But I didn't want to be the one who made it worse. What if I was wrong? What if I called the police and ruined his life over nothing? What if? But you weren't wrong. Bones kept his voice gentle, professional. And that girl suffered because choosing to be comfortable was easier than choosing to be brave. We'll need you to make an official statement. For the record. 3 doors down, Cole knocked on 2853 Thornhill. James Whitmore answered. 40 years old, former teacher at Lincoln High School. The one Rowan attended before Garrett pulled her out, claiming homeschool. Mr. Whitmore. Cole's voice was measured, controlled. I understand you taught Rowan Quinn at Lincoln High 2 years ago. James's face went pale. Is Rowan okay? She's alive, barely. No thanks to the system that was supposed to protect her. You filed a report about her, didn't you? When you noticed the bruising, the weight loss? James nodded slowly. 14 months ago, Rowan came to school with a black eye, said she fell. But I've been teaching 20 years. I know what abuse looks like. I filed a report with the principal, documented everything. Photographs, observations, timeline. What happened to that report? Nothing, absolutely nothing. The principal called me into his office, said Garrett Ford was a respected member of the community, that we needed to be careful about making accusations without proof, that I could be sued, that I could lose my job. James's voice got quieter, more ashamed. 2 weeks later, Rowan stopped coming to school. Garrett submitted homeschool paperwork. I called CPS to follow up. They said they'd investigated and found no concerns, so I told myself maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I'd seen abuse where there was just a clumsy kid and an overworked guardian. You didn't push harder. James's shoulders sagged, weight of guilt visible. Physical. I should have. God, I should have. But I had my own job to protect, my own family to think about. And the system said she was fine. So I chose to believe the system, chose to protect myself instead of her. He looked at Cole, met his eyes. I've thought about Rowan every day for a year, wondered where she was, if she was okay. And now you're telling me she was on the streets because I didn't fight hard enough. Mr. Whitmore, Cole's voice carried no judgment, just facts. You tried. That's more than most people did. But yes, the system failed. And we're going to document every single failure so it can't happen again. We'll need your statement. On record, by 9 a.m., Bones and Cole had collected statements from 6 neighbors, each one a variation of the same theme. I saw something, I heard something. I didn't act because I didn't want to interfere. Didn't want to be wrong, didn't want the inconvenience of getting involved. 6 people who chose comfort over courage. 6 people who heard a child screaming and did nothing. Wire, meanwhile, was downtown at the Public Records Office. Pulled Garrett Ford's financial records, the ones that were public. Property records showing the mortgage payoff. Vehicle registration for the new truck. Court documents showing Garrett had petitioned for guardianship of Rowan after Laurel's death. But it was the insurance documents that made Wire stop cold. Tucked in the same folder with Rowan's policy, the $180,000 that was supposed to insure her future was another policy. Older, taken out on Laurel Marie Quinn 8 years ago. Beneficiary, Garrett Anthony Ford. Payout amount, $180,000. Date of death listed, December 15th, 2023. Payout processed, February 20th, 2024. And underneath that, a note in the investigator's file, marked resolved, accidental death. But the medical examiner had added a comment in different handwriting. Brake line failure suspicious, given vehicle age and maintenance records. Recommend further investigation. That recommendation had been ignored, filed away, forgotten. Because Garrett Ford was a respected member of the community. Because asking uncomfortable questions was harder than accepting comfortable lies. Wire pulled out his phone. Called Bones. We've got a pattern. Laurel Quinn's death wasn't an accident. Garrett killed her for the insurance money, then positioned himself as Rowan's guardian to steal her inheritance too. This isn't his first victim. It's his second. Bones relayed that information to Priest. The club president closed his eyes, breathed slowly. When he opened them again, his voice was steel. Then we make sure there's no third. Wire, pull every financial record you can legally access. I want to see every dollar Garrett spent from both payouts, every purchase, every transaction. Build a timeline that shows exactly how he spent money meant for a dead woman and her orphaned daughter. Wire worked fast, pulled bank statements, credit card records, loan applications, built a forensic financial report that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Total amount embezzled from Rowan's trust, $127,000. Mortgage payoff on Garrett's house, $48,000. Paid 3 months after Laurel died. Paid with Rowan's money while Rowan was locked in a basement eating one meal a day. New Ford F-150, $43,000. Purchased 6 months after Laurel died. Vanity, license plate, fresh start. The irony so thick you could choke on it. Gambling debts paid, $22,000. Records from 3 different casinos, all paid within 8 months of becoming Rowan's guardian. Using money meant to give her a future. Remaining balance in trust account, $53,000. But Wire also recovered something else. Deleted emails from Garrett's computer, pulled from his service provider's backup servers. With a warrant, Bones had helped expedite through his old contacts at the prosecutor's office. Email to attorney dated 7 months ago. Subject line, trust fund question. Body of email, if beneficiary dies before age of majority, what happens to remaining funds? Does it revert to trustee as next of kin? What documentation would be required? Asking for a client. Email to insurance broker dated 6 months ago. Updating beneficiary information on existing life insurance policy. Want to make sure everything's current in case of, unexpected circumstances. The language was careful, vague, but the intent was clear. Garrett was planning, preparing, making sure that when Rowan died, he'd collect everything. But the smoking gun was a text message exchange. Wire recovered from 3 weeks before Rowan escaped, between Garrett and an unknown number. Conversation deleted from Garrett's phone, but preserved in cellular provider records. Garrett, problem solving itself, another month of winter should do it. Then I'm free and clear. Unknown number, you're playing with fire, Marcus. Garrett, fire already played, this is just cleanup. Wire printed everything, created a folder that would end Garrett Ford's freedom forever. Financial evidence, digital evidence, communications showing premeditation, intent, conspiracy. He called Bones. We have enough to put him away for 20 years. Maybe more if we can prove he killed Laurel. At 11 a.m., Bones made a call that would crack the system wide open. Robert Hayes, the CPS caseworker who'd investigated Rowan's case 8 months ago, who'd spent 1 hour at Garrett's house and closed the file. Case resolved. No concerns found. Mr. Hayes, Bones kept his voice professional. Clinical, this is Warren Hale. I'm investigating the Garrett Ford case. You conducted a home visit in June of last year regarding Rowan Quinn. Can you walk me through what you found? Robert's voice was defensive immediately. I followed protocol, visited the home unannounced. Garrett showed me the child's bedroom. Clean, adequate, showed me educational materials for homeschooling. The child appeared healthy, home was well maintained. No evidence of abuse or neglect. Did you interview Rowan alone? Away from Garrett. A pause, long enough to be damning. Garrett said Rowan was uncomfortable with strangers, had trauma from her mother's death. He stayed present during the interview to provide emotional support. So you never spoke to her without her alleged abuser in the room. Another pause. Longer. Protocol allows parental presence during interviews with minors, especially if the child requests it. Did Rowan request it? Or did Garrett request it on her behalf? Silence. Mr. Hayes, Bones let that silence stretch, let it become uncomfortable. Rowan was being held in a basement storage room, fed once daily, locked in for 16 to 18 hours at a time. The bedroom Garrett showed you was staged, a guest room he prepared for your visit. Did you physically verify that Rowan slept in the room he showed you? Did you check for other sleeping spaces in the home? More silence. Heavy, guilty. Did you examine her for signs of malnutrition, untreated injuries, physical abuse? I'm not a medical professional. Robert's voice was defensive now, angry. I did my job according to the procedures I'm required to follow. If those procedures are inadequate, that's a systemic issue, not my personal failing. Did you follow up after closing the case? Check on Rowan's welfare even once in the 8 months since. Listen, I have a caseload of 73 children. I did what I was required to do. I can't be expected to. Mr. Hayes, Bones cut him off, voice cold now, hard. Rowan Quinn has been homeless for 9 months. She weighs 98 pounds. She has untreated fractures, rope burn scars from prolonged restraint, and was hours away from organ failure when we found her. Your investigation cleared Garrett Ford. And because of that clearance, Rowan's subsequent attempts to get help were dismissed. You'll need to provide formal testimony explaining how you reached your conclusions. The line went dead. By 1 p.m., Wire had compiled everything into a presentation that would convince any prosecutor. Every withdrawal, every purchase, every law, every failure, every moment someone could have intervened and didn't. Amanda Pierce arrived at the clubhouse at 2 p.m., Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office, 38 years old. Initially skeptical when Bones brought her this case that morning, a bunch of bikers claiming abuse, claiming corruption, claiming system failure. She'd heard it before, usually from people trying to work an angle. She wasn't skeptical anymore. Bones and Wire walked her through everything: the financial forensics, the deleted emails, the text messages, the neighbor testimonies, the teacher's report that was ignored, the CPS investigation that was a joke, the medical evidence from Rowan's examination, and Rowan's notebook, pages and pages of careful documentation, dates, conversations recorded word for word, evidence preserved by a 17-year-old girl who knew the system had already failed her 4 times, who knew her only chance was documenting everything herself. Amanda read the transcribed phone call, the one Rowan had overheard through the basement air vent, Garrett planning her death, calculating timelines, discussing how to make it look natural, talking about memorial services and moving on with his life. By the time Amanda finished reading, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. Professional rage at a system that failed, at procedures that protected abusers, at comfortable lies that let good people look away from suffering. This is the most well-documented abuse case I've seen in 15 years. Her voice was tight, controlled. We have financial evidence, digital evidence, witness testimony, medical evidence, and the victim's own documentation. Garrett Ford is going to prison. The only question is for how long. What about Laurel Quinn's death? Bones asked. The mother, Amanda, flipped through Wire's report on the insurance investigation. Read the medical examiner's note about suspicious brake line failure. Read about Garrett borrowing the car the morning of the accident. Read about the insurance payout that came just before he became Rowan's guardian. We reopened that case. Amanda's voice was decisive. I'll call the medical examiner today. If we can prove Garrett tampered with those brakes, we're talking murder charges. Life without parole. How fast can you move? Amanda looked at the assembled brothers, at 180 men who'd mobilized to protect one girl, at Priest standing quiet and determined, at Cole who'd given his jacket to a stranger, at Bones and Wire who'd built a case in 12 hours that would take most investigators 12 weeks. I'll have arrest warrants by end of business today. Bail hearing Monday morning. I'm recommending $500,000 bail. He won't make it. And even if he does, we'll have him under 24-hour surveillance. She closed the folders, made eye contact with Priest. But I need Rowan. I need her testimony. I need her willing to face him in court. She'll be ready. Cole spoke up, voice certain. We'll make sure of it. At 2:30 p.m., Bones walked up to Garrett Ford's front door, knocked firmly, authoritative. The knock of someone who has legal backing and knows it. Garrett answered, clean-shaven, reading glasses perched on his nose, wearing khakis and a polo shirt. Casual Saturday afternoon. He was working on his truck, grease on his hands, wrench on the workbench visible through the garage door. Playing the role of normal suburban dad, home maintenance, weekend projects. Nothing to hide. He looked confused, annoyed, like a man interrupted during ordinary tasks. Can I help you? Behind Bones, 180 motorcycles lined the street, 180 men in leather, watching, waiting, making sure Garrett understood that the girl he tried to disappear now had protection he couldn't comprehend. Garrett Ford, yes, I'm Warren Hale, former Cincinnati PD. I'm here regarding Rowan Quinn. Bones watched Garrett's face carefully, looking for tells, micro-expressions, the involuntary reactions people can't control when they're confronted with truth they've been hiding. We know she's been homeless for 9 months. We know about the basement room, the starvation, the stolen inheritance, and we know what you said on the phone about letting accidents happen to kids on the street. Garrett's expression didn't change. Smooth, practiced. Years of lying reflected in his ability to maintain composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Rowan ran away 9 months ago. I've been searching for her. Filed a missing person report and everything. I've been worried sick. Funny, we pulled that report. You filed it 8 months ago, 1 month after she disappeared. And you marked her as a chronic runaway with behavioral issues. No Amber Alert, no active search, just a paper trail to cover yourself. Rowan has problems. Garrett's voice carried just the right amount of concerned guardian. Emotional problems stemming from her mother's death. I tried to help her, but she refused treatment, refused to cooperate. Eventually she left. We have bank records. Bones pulled out his phone, showed Garrett the screen, showing you've withdrawn $127,000 from her trust account, paid off your mortgage, bought that truck. We have witness statements from neighbors who heard Rowan screaming. We have testimony from her former teacher who filed abuse reports that were ignored. We have medical evidence showing prolonged starvation and restraint. Garrett's face remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, reassessing, realizing this wasn't going away. And we have Rowan's notebook, Bones continued, voice steady, where she documented word for word your phone conversation about waiting for her to die so you could collect the remaining $53,000. Garrett's expression went carefully blank. Lawyer mask, I'd like to speak to my attorney. That's your right. Bones stepped back. Officers. 3 Cincinnati PD cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. Detective Amanda Pierce stepped out, voice carrying across the quiet street. Clear, authoritative, professional. Garrett Anthony Ford, you're under arrest. Her voice was cold, clinical, reading rights like a death sentence. Felony child abuse, unlawful restraint, theft of funds held in trust, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. They cuffed him right there, in the driveway, hands wrenched behind his back, face pressed against the hood of his truck. The same truck he'd bought with Rowan's money. The same hands that had broken Rowan's wrist, now rendered powerless, restrained, controlled. The neighbors came out to watch. Dorothy Patterson standing on her porch, hand over her mouth, crying. James Whitmore 3 doors down, face pale with guilt. Sandra Mitchell from the church group. The one who'd told Rowan that God helps those who help themselves. Now watching in horror as the respected community member got arrested. All of them standing there, bearing witness to consequences they could have prevented. To justice arriving 9 months too late. To a girl who'd survived not because of their help, but in spite of their silence. Garrett was loaded into the back of a police cruiser, head pushed down, door slammed, no longer the respected guardian. The church deacon, the youth soccer coach, now just another criminal in the back of a police car, heading to a cell where his reputation couldn't protect him anymore. At the clubhouse, Rowan sat with Ivy and Doc Nash. They'd kept her there all day. Safe, warm, fed, protected. She'd gained 2 pounds in 24 hours, just from consistent meals and shelter and not having to fight for survival every moment. The phone rang. Cole's number. Doc answered. Put it on speaker. It's done. Cole's voice was steady, controlled. He's in custody. Bail hearing Monday, but Amanda Pierce is recommending $500,000. He won't make it. The evidence we've collected is... He paused. Rowan, he's going to prison for a very long time. Minimum 8 years, and we're still investigating your mother's death. The medical examiner is reopening that case based on Wire's findings. Rowan couldn't speak, could only hold the phone, tears running down her face. 9 months of fear, 9 months of waiting for Garrett to find her, to finish what he'd started. 9 months of believing no one cared, that she'd die invisible, that he'd win. Ivy wrapped an arm around her. Doc squeezed her hand. You're safe. Cole's voice was gentle now. Finally, you're safe. At the clubhouse, priest called a meeting. All 180 brothers present. The room fell silent as he stood. Men who'd given up their Saturday, who'd ridden through freezing weather, who'd spent hours collecting evidence and statements, who'd mobilized because one of their own needed protection. Brothers, priest's voice carried weight. Authority, we came together for Rowan Quinn, to protect her, to get justice. Today, Garrett Ford was arrested and charged with 6 felonies. The evidence we gathered made that possible. But this isn't the end of our work. He looked around the room. At men's society feared, men with records, men with reputations, men who'd chosen to use their power to protect instead of harm. Rowan turns 18 in 9 months. Until then, she needs protection. Housing, medical care, education, legal support. We made a promise to her. Now we keep it. All in favor of establishing full club protection until she reaches majority. The room went quiet. 180 men, all wearing their cuts, all carrying the weight of what was being asked. Full protection meant resources, commitment, responsibility. For a moment, nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator. The distant sound of a motorcycle outside. The weight of decision. Then every single hand went up. Not a moment's hesitation. Not a single dissenting voice. 180 men voting unanimously to protect a girl who'd saved one of their own. Because that's what brother really means. Because that's what blood debt requires. Justice had been served. But justice wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. The paperwork took 3 days to process. Emergency custody granted to the state of Ohio with Hells Angels Ohio chapter, designated as Rowan Quinn's temporary guardians pending her 18th birthday. Unprecedented, unusual. The kind of arrangement that made family court judges nervous and social workers skeptical. But Judge Maria Costello had looked at the evidence, at the system failures documented in excruciating detail, at CPS caseworker who never interviewed the victim alone, at police officer who sent an abused child back to her abuser, at teacher whose report was buried, at neighbors who heard screaming and did nothing. And she looked at Rowan, sitting in her chambers still wearing Cole's leather jacket, still weighing 98 pounds, still carrying her mother's stethoscope in a waterproof bag like a talisman, still flinching at sudden movements, still expecting the world to hurt her because that's what the world had always done. Miss Quinn, Judge Costello's voice had been gentle, firm. I'm granting protective custody to the Hells Angels Ohio chapter under supervision of the state. You'll have weekly check-ins with a court-appointed advocate, monthly reviews with my office. But you'll be housed, fed, educated, and protected by people who've already proven they'll fight for you. Does this arrangement feel safe to you? Rowan had nodded, unable to speak, because safe was a word she'd forgotten existed, a concept so foreign it felt like a language she'd never learned. But sitting there in that office, surrounded by people who'd mobilized an army for her, who'd built a case in 48 hours, who'd stood between her and the man who wanted her dead, safe felt possible. For the first time in 14 months, safe felt real. By the end of February, Rowan was living in an apartment 3 blocks from the clubhouse. 2 bedrooms, furnished by brothers who'd pooled resources. Not charity, priest had insisted, but investment in family. Rent paid 6 months in advance by club funds, security deposit, utilities, everything handled, everything taken care of. The apartment was small, clean, warm, had a working heater and hot water, and locks on the doors that Rowan controlled. Had a refrigerator that stayed stocked. A pantry with food she didn't have to ration. A bed with actual sheets and blankets instead of cardboard and newspaper. It felt like a palace. It felt like home. Doc Nash visited daily for the first 2 weeks, monitoring refeeding syndrome, a dangerous condition where malnourished bodies can't handle normal food intake without medical supervision. Too much too fast could cause cardiac arrest, organ failure, death after survival. The cruelest irony. Your body forgot how to process food properly. Doc explained gently, sitting at Rowan's small kitchen table, teaching her, educating her. We have to teach it again. Small portions, 6 times a day, protein, complex carbs, healthy fats. It'll feel like nothing at first, like you're barely eating. But in a month, you'll notice the difference. Rowan ate on schedule, 6 small meals, protein shakes between, vitamins, supplements, rebuilding what starvation had destroyed. It was harder than she'd expected. Her stomach had shrunk. Her body rejected food it desperately needed. But she pushed through because giving up now after surviving everything would be the ultimate betrayal. Wire set up security, cameras covering all entry points, reinforced locks on doors and windows, motion sensors, a panic button connected directly to the clubhouse. Press it and brothers would arrive in under 3 minutes, armed, ready, willing to burn down the world if Rowan was threatened. You never have to be afraid of someone breaking in again, Wire said, showing her how everything worked. Patient, thorough, and we've filed a restraining order against Garrett. If he makes bail, which he won't, but if he does, he can't come within 500 feet of you or this address. Violation means immediate arrest, no questions asked. Rowan learned to sleep without one eye open, learned to close her eyes without seeing Garrett's face, learned that locked doors could actually keep monsters out. It took weeks, but slowly, incrementally. Sleep became rest instead of survival mode. Bones handled the legal coordination. Garrett's trial was set for June, 4 months away. But the evidence was so overwhelming that Garrett's attorney, Bradley Kirkman, had approached the prosecution about a plea deal within the first week. Garrett's lawyer knows he can't win this, Bones explained to Rowan. They were sitting in her apartment, going over what to expect. The financial records alone are damning. Add in the witness testimonies. Your medical evidence, the reopened investigation into your mother's death. Kirkman's talking about an 8-year plea with no parole eligibility for 5. And if he doesn't take the deal, if we go to trial, Amanda Pierce will bury him. She's talking 15 to 20 years on all charges combined. Rowan absorbed this information slowly, processing, trying to understand that justice was actually happening, that the man who'd stolen everything wasn't going to walk away. What about my mother? Wire said they're reopening her case. The medical examiner reviewed the original accident report. Bones pulled out his notes. Your mother's brake lines showed wear inconsistent with the vehicle's age and maintenance history. The car was only 3 years old, regularly serviced, but the brake lines were severely degraded, like they'd been tampered with. Rowan's hands curled into fists, nails biting into palms. Garrett borrowed her car the morning of the accident. Bones continued, told her he needed to run errands. She drove it that evening. Lost brake function on a hill. Single car collision into a tree. The medical examiner is ruling it suspicious death and recommending a full investigation. If they can prove Garrett tampered with the brakes, he's looking at murder charges, life without parole. Rowan touched the stethoscope hanging around her neck. Her mother's. The only thing Laurel Quinn had left behind besides memories and medical knowledge that had saved Ivy's life. Good. Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. She deserves justice too. Cole became Rowan's primary mentor. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he'd pick her up for what he called recovery sessions. Sometimes it was just breakfast at a diner, teaching Rowan it was okay to eat in public, that no one would take food away, that she could order what she wanted without fear. Other times it was physical therapy for her wrist, exercises to restore range of motion. Preparing for the surgery, Wire had arranged through his VA connections. Corrective surgery to reset the bone, pins and plates. Proper healing, finally. "You saved my daughter's life," Cole said one morning over pancakes. Rowan was eating slowly, small bites, but eating. "That means you're my daughter too now, not replacing your mom. No one could. But you've got a father figure if you want one. Someone who will teach you to ride, who will show up to school events, who will make sure you know you matter." Rowan had cried into her orange juice, the kind of crying that's relief and grief mixed together. The kind that comes when you finally feel safe enough to fall apart. Cole had just sat there, patient, present, letting her cry, not trying to fix it, just being there, solid, steady, safe. Ivy became Rowan's closest friend, the first real friend Rowan had in 2 years. They were close in age, Ivy 16, Rowan 17, but their experiences couldn't have been more different. Ivy had grown up safe, loved, protected. Rowan had grown up and then had it all ripped away. But Ivy never treated Rowan like a charity case, never looked at her with pity, never made her feel like damaged goods. Just friendship, pure and uncomplicated. Two girls who'd both nearly died on the same frozen sidewalk, both saved by choices that mattered. "You want to come to my soccer game Saturday?" Ivy asked one afternoon. They were studying together at Rowan's apartment, Ivy helping Rowan catch up on 2 years of missed education. "Dad's bringing half the club as my personal cheering section. It's embarrassing, but also kind of awesome." Rowan smiled, a real smile, the first genuine one in months. "Yeah, I'd like that." By March, Rowan had gained 12 pounds, still underweight but no longer critical. Her pneumonia cleared with proper antibiotics and rest. Her wrist was scheduled for corrective surgery in April. The procedure would take 3 hours, recovery 6 weeks, physical therapy after. But she'd have function back, have mobility, have the ability to pursue the career she wanted. Doc Nash had also connected Rowan with therapy, trauma counseling twice weekly with Dr. Rachel Morgan, who specialized in abuse survivors, who understood that healing wasn't linear, that some days you felt strong and other days you felt like you were back in the basement. "Healing isn't linear," Dr. Morgan explained in their first session. "Some days you'll feel powerful, like you've conquered everything. Other days you'll feel like you're drowning, like nothing has changed. Both are okay. Both are part of the process. Recovery isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. Sometimes you revisit old pain, but each time you do, you're stronger, more equipped, more whole." Rowan learned to talk about the basement, the hunger, the isolation, the overheard conversation that had driven her to escape. She learned that her hypervigilance, constantly scanning for exits, flinching at sudden movements, was a survival mechanism that had kept her alive but didn't have to control her forever. And slowly, over weeks that turned into months, Rowan started to believe she might actually survive, not just physically but emotionally, that the girl Laurel Quinn had raised, curious, brave, kind, might still exist under all the trauma. In April, Garrett Ford took the plea deal, 8 years in state prison, no parole eligibility for 5 years. He'd serve his time at Lebanon Correctional Institution, 2 hours from Cincinnati, far enough that Rowan would never accidentally encounter him, far enough that his presence wouldn't haunt her daily life. The day of his sentencing, Rowan sat in the courtroom, Cole on one side, Ivy on the other, Priest and Doc behind them, Bones standing near the prosecutor's table, Wire in the back documenting everything, a wall of protection around her, a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore, wasn't invisible, wasn't disposable. Judge Costello looked at Garrett, wearing an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed, no longer the respected guardian, the church deacon, the youth soccer coach, just another criminal who'd preyed on the vulnerable. "Mr. Ford," Judge Costello's voice was ice, "you were entrusted with the care of a minor child who had just lost her mother. Instead of protecting her, you imprisoned her. Instead of nurturing her, you starved her. Instead of honoring the memory of the woman who trusted you, you killed her for money and then attempted to do the same to her daughter. The courtroom was silent, packed, media in the back. Neighbors who'd done nothing, CPS worker who'd failed, teacher who'd tried, all bearing witness. You are a predator who wore the mask of respectability while committing acts of calculated cruelty. The court sentences you to 8 years in state prison. And I want you to understand something. This sentence is a gift you don't deserve. If the law allowed, I would give you life, but know this, every day you spend in that cell is because a 17-year-old girl was braver than you, stronger than you, better than you. She survived your worst, and she'll thrive while you rot. Garrett looked back at Rowan once, just once, and what Rowan saw in his face wasn't remorse. It was rage, rage that he'd been caught, that a girl he'd underestimated had won, that his perfect plan had fallen apart. But Rowan didn't flinch, didn't look away, just stared back with the strength of someone who'd walked through hell and come out the other side. Someone who'd knelt on frozen concrete for 8 minutes to save a stranger. Someone who'd documented her own abuse because she knew the system would fail her. Someone who'd survived. After the sentencing, Amanda Pierce approached Rowan in the courthouse hallway, pulled her aside, spoke quietly. I want you to know something. This case changed how our office handles abuse reports. We're implementing new protocols, mandatory solo interviews with minors, no guardian present unless the child specifically requests it, follow-up visits within 30 days, better training for caseworkers. It won't bring back the time you lost, but it might save the next Rowan Quinn. Rowan nodded, throat tight. Good, that's really good. Outside the courthouse, the press was waiting. Cameras, reporters shouting questions, microphones thrust forward, everyone wanting the story, the soundbite, the trauma packaged for consumption. Cole positioned himself between Rowan and the crowd, creating a shield. Other brothers formed a protective circle. Wire had already released a statement on Rowan's behalf. She wouldn't be giving interviews, wouldn't be exploited, wouldn't have her suffering turned into entertainment. But Priest spoke, standing on the courthouse steps, 180 brothers behind him, making a statement that would be quoted in every article, played on every news broadcast. Today, justice was served. His voice carried authority, conviction. But this story isn't about bikers or patches or leather jackets. It's about a 17-year-old girl who chose courage over comfort, who saved a stranger's life when everyone else just watched, who survived 9 months of hell because she refused to disappear. Rowan Quinn is everything right with this world, and Garrett Ford represents everything wrong. We protected her because that's what family does, and we'll keep protecting her until she doesn't need us anymore. 6 months later, November 3rd, Rowan's 18th birthday. The clubhouse was decorated with streamers and balloons, a cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, Rowan's favorite, sat on a table surrounded by presents wrapped in paper that brothers had clearly struggled with. Tape everywhere, uneven folds, the effort mattering more than the execution. 75 people crammed into the space, brothers and their families. Ivy and her friends from soccer, Doc Nash, Bones and Wire, Amanda Pierce, who'd become a friend through the legal process, Dr. Rachel Morgan, Rowan's therapist, even Judge Costello, who'd approved the guardianship and checked in monthly to make sure Rowan was thriving. Rowan stood in the center, wearing jeans that actually fit her 120-pound frame. A Hells Angels t-shirt Ivy had gotten her as a joke, but that Rowan wore proudly. Her wrist in a brace from the surgery that had finally corrected the break. Mobility restored, function returning, pain finally manageable. Her hair was clean and trimmed, pulled back in a neat ponytail, dark circles faded, cheeks fuller, eyes that still carried shadows but also held light. She looked 17. Finally looked her age, finally looked like someone who had a future instead of just a past. Everyone sang happy birthday. Rowan blew out the candles, made a wish that for once felt possible instead of desperate. A wish about college, about becoming an EMT, about helping others the way she'd been helped, about making her mother proud. Afterward, Priest pulled Rowan aside, handed her an envelope. Heavy, substantial. What's this? Open it. Inside was a bank statement. The trust account in Rowan's name. Balance $53,847. The remaining inheritance Garrett hadn't stolen, plus another $42,000, raised by Hell's Angels chapters across Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, brothers who'd heard Rowan's story and wanted to help, who'd contributed $20, $50, whatever they could, building a fund that would give Rowan options. Total, $95,847. That's yours, Priest said, voice gentle, proud, all of it, for college, for trade school, for whatever future you want to build. And there's more. Doc's Hospital is offering you an EMT training program, paid position as a trainee. You'd be following your mother's footsteps, helping people, saving lives. Rowan stared at the numbers, at the possibility, at the future that had been stolen and was now being handed back. Better than before. Supported by people who'd chosen to care. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it. Priest's voice was firm, encouraging. Say you'll build something beautiful out of everything ugly you survived. Say you'll be happy. That's all we want. Your happiness, your success, your thriving. That's the only payment we'll ever ask for. Rowan hugged Priest, this man who'd lost his own daughter, Jessica, but had chosen to save someone else's. Who'd mobilized a brotherhood because he believed protecting the vulnerable was sacred duty. Who'd kept every promise made. Thank you, Rowan whispered, for seeing me when I was invisible. You were never invisible, Rowan. Priest's voice was rough with emotion. You were just surrounded by people who chose not to look. But once someone really sees you, once someone decides you matter, you can't be ignored anymore. You become unforgettable. The statistics from Rowan's case were documented carefully, filed with courts and social services, used for policy reform, numbers that would save lives even though they'd come too late to save Rowan from suffering. Abuse reports in Hamilton County schools dropped 43% after Hell's Angels established Angels Watch, a program monitoring at-risk youth, checking in, following up, being present. CPS implemented mandatory solo interviews with minors, follow-up visits within 30 days of any abuse report, no more single-visit clearances, no more taking guardians at their word. Ohio passed what became known as Rowan's Law, requiring financial auditors for all trust accounts involving minors with deceased parents, independent oversight, regular reporting, protection for vulnerable assets. 4 other districts across Ohio adopted similar guardian oversight programs, modeling themselves on what worked in Hamilton County, building systems that actually protected instead of just processed. But numbers don't capture what really changed. Can't measure the shift that happened when people saw that the scary-looking bikers were actually the heroes. That leather and tattoos didn't determine character. That the people society feared most had proven to be the gentlest protectors. Rowan enrolled in the EMT program, started classes in January, found she had her mother's gift, the ability to stay calm in crisis, to see past blood and panic to the person who needed help, to make decisions under pressure, to save lives. She volunteered at the same hospital where Doc worked, started running calls with paramedics, logged hours, built skills, learned procedures, and discovered that helping others helped her. That every life she saved felt like honoring her mother, like proving Garrett hadn't won, like turning pain into purpose. She saved 3 lives in her first 6 months on the job. A car accident victim, an elderly man having a heart attack, a child who'd stopped breathing. Each time she performed CPR, each time her hands moved with muscle memory. She thought about her mother, about Ivy, about the choice to act instead of watch. She made honor roll every semester, became president of the EMT student organization, started speaking at high schools about recognizing abuse signs, about how to help, about being the person who doesn't walk past. Her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger, more confident, more certain. But this story isn't really about statistics or programs or policy changes. It's about what happens when one person decides to act instead of watch. When someone chooses to kneel on frozen concrete for 8 minutes even though they're dying themselves. When courage looks like a malnourished teenager refusing to let a stranger die while everyone else just films. And it's about what happens when the people society fears most turn out to be the gentlest protectors, when leather jackets and motorcycle engines become symbols of safety instead of danger. When a brotherhood built on loyalty proves that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when you're drowning. 2 years later, February 10th, Rowan was 20 years old, licensed EMT, healthy, safe, thriving. Still had nightmares sometimes. Still flinched at sudden movements. Still carried scars that would never fully fade. But she was healing. Learning that surviving wasn't the same as living. And she was finally doing both. She kept her mother's stethoscope in her locker at work, used it every shift, honored Laurel Quinn's memory by doing exactly what Laurel had taught her. Help people when you're the only one who can. Every February 10th, Rowan and Ivy met at Riverside Roastery, sat at a table near where everything had changed, ordered coffee, remembered, talked, laughed, cried, celebrated being alive, being friends, being survivors who'd chosen to thrive. The coffee shop still smelled like cinnamon and fresh roasted beans. Still got crowded on Saturday mornings. But now there was a plaque on the wall near the entrance. Bronze. Permanent. Words etched deep. In honor of Rowan Quinn, who taught us that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they look like someone everyone else stopped seeing. That Saturday morning, 2 years after, Rowan sat with Ivy, both of them wearing EMT uniforms now. Ivy had followed Rowan's path, become a paramedic. They worked different shifts but met whenever they could, shared stories, compared calls, supported each other. "Remember when you saved my life?" Ivy said, smiling, voice light but eyes serious. "Remember when your dad gave me his jacket?" Rowan countered. "When he made me believe I was worth saving." We were both worth saving. Ivy reached across the table, squeezed Rowan's hand, and we're both proof that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Not because the trauma was good, but because we chose to do something with it, chose to help others, chose to matter. Rowan's radio crackled. Dispatch calling, medical emergency 3 blocks away, possible cardiac arrest. She and Ivy both stood, grabbed their bags, started moving. As they ran, Rowan thought about the circle, about being the girl no one saw, about Cole giving her protection, about 180 motorcycles mobilizing for someone they'd never met, about justice, about healing, about purpose. They arrived at the scene, a young man, maybe 25, collapsed on the sidewalk, not breathing. No pulse, people standing around, phones out, filming, not helping, just watching. Rowan dropped to her knees, hands already moving, already beginning compressions. Ivy calling for additional units, setting up equipment, working together, synchronized, efficient, trained. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rhythm her mother had taught her, the beat that had saved Ivy, the choice to act instead of watch. Rowan pushed down, compressed, fought death with everything she had. Because that's what you do, when you're the only one who can help, when you've been on both sides, when you know what it means to be saved. After 3 minutes, the young man gasped, eyes opening, breathing, alive. "You're okay." Rowan's voice was steady, professional, comforting. "You're going to be okay. I've got you." The young man looked up at her, confused, scared, grateful. "Who are you?" Rowan smiled, squeezed his hand. "My name's Rowan. I'm an EMT, and you're safe now." As paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, as Ivy cleaned up equipment, as the crowd dispersed, Rowan stood there, in her uniform, with her mother's stethoscope, on the street where she'd once been homeless, invisible, dying, and she understood something profound. You don't need 180 motorcycles to change someone's story. You just need to pay attention, to ask uncomfortable questions, to call the hotline when something feels wrong, to believe the person who's trembling while telling you something impossible, to be the one who doesn't walk past. Rowan pulled out her phone, texted Cole, "Saved another one today. Wish you could have seen it." His response came immediately. "I don't need to see it. I know what you're capable of. Proud of you, kid. Always." That evening, Rowan sat in her apartment, The one she'd earned, the one she paid for with money from her EMT job, surrounded by textbooks and study materials, planning to take her paramedic certification next year, building a career, building a life. On her wall hung Ivy's drawings from when they were younger. Photos of the club, Cole and Priest and Bones and Wire, her chosen family, her army, her protectors who'd become her friends, and hanging in a frame above her desk, the original newspaper article about Garrett's arrest. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that justice exists, that people can change stories, that being seen saves lives. Her phone buzzed. Group text from Ivy. Club ride tomorrow. Dad says you're riding with him. No arguments, Rowan smiled. Type back. Wouldn't miss it. Because that's what family does. Shows up, chooses you, keeps choosing you, every day, every moment, every time it matters. Sunday morning, Rowan stood outside the clubhouse, wearing leather jacket Cole had given her 2 years ago. The one that had saved her life, not because it was warm, but because it meant protection, meant someone cared, meant she mattered. 180 motorcycles lined up, brothers and families. Ivy on her own bike now, waving, smiling. Cole on his Harley, gesturing for Rowan to climb on behind him. Ready, he asked, always. They rode through Cincinnati, through streets Rowan had walked when she was invisible, past Riverside Roastery where everything changed, past the apartment where she'd rebuilt, past the hospital where she now worked, past her future instead of her past. The wind was cold, but Rowan didn't feel it. Wrapped in leather, surrounded by family, protected by people who'd chosen her, who'd mobilized an army because one girl mattered, because blood debt is real, because brotherhood means something. At a stoplight, Rowan looked around, at 180 motorcycles, at families riding together, at Priest leading, at Bones and Wire flanking, at Doc on her own bike, at this chosen family that had saved her. And she understood the final truth. She'd written her wish not on a tree, but in action, in 8 minutes of CPR, in refusal to walk past suffering, in choice to be brave when being comfortable was easier. And her wish had been answered not by magic, but by people who believed protecting the vulnerable was sacred duty. The light turned green, the formation moved, and Rowan held on. Not because she was afraid of falling, but because holding on meant being part of something, meant belonging, meant having people who would catch you if you did fall. Somewhere in Ohio, other girls were suffering. Other children were being abused. Other victims were being failed by systems meant to protect them. And Rowan would be there, would show up, would be the person who didn't walk past, would prove that one person acting can change everything. Because she'd learned the most important lesson, the one her mother had taught her, the one Cole had demonstrated, the one 180 brothers had proven. You don't have to be perfect to make a difference. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to wait for someone else to act. You just have to show up. You just have to care. You just have to be the one who doesn't walk away. Rowan had been the girl no one saw, had survived 9 months invisible, had knelt on frozen concrete and refused to let someone die, had documented her own abuse, had waited for justice, had healed, had thrived, had become an EMT, had saved lives, had proven that trauma doesn't define you, that being seen saves you, that family is chosen, that brotherhood is real, that hope exists. The formation rode through Cincinnati, past poverty and privilege, past suffering and success, past people who needed help and people who could provide it. And Rowan rode with them, part of something bigger, part of a story that proved protection is the highest form of love. In her pocket was a letter, written that morning, to be read at her paramedic graduation next year. Words she'd practiced, refined, perfected. My name is Rowan Quinn. 2 years ago, I was homeless, starving, invisible. Everyone walked past me, everyone except one man who gave me his jacket, and 180 brothers who mobilized an army. They saw me when no one else did. They protected me, they saved me, and now I save others. Because that's what you do when you've been given a second chance. You pass it forward, every single day, every single life, every single moment. The ride ended at the cemetery, where Laurel Quinn was buried. Rowan hadn't visited in 6 months. Too busy, too focused on living. But today felt right. Anniversary of the day everything changed. The day she saved Ivy. The day Cole saved her. The day an army mobilized. Rowan stood at her mother's grave. Cole standing back, giving her privacy, giving her space. But present, protective, permanent. "Hi, Mom." Rowan's voice was quiet, strong. "I did it. Became an EMT, saved lives, made you proud. I hope I use your stethoscope every shift. I remember everything you taught me. And I'm okay. Finally. Really okay." The wind rustled through winter bare trees, cold but not cruel, harsh but not hopeless. I met good people, people who protected me, who fought for me, who proved family is chosen. That brotherhood is real. That being seen saves lives. Rowan touched the headstone, traced her mother's name. "You'd like them. You'd like who I've become. You'd be proud." Cole approached, stood beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "She would be." His voice was certain. Absolute. "She is." They stood there, daughter and chosen father, at the grave of the woman who'd started everything, who'd taught CPR, who'd raised a girl brave enough to save strangers, strong enough to survive hell, determined enough to thrive. "Ready to go?" Cole asked eventually. "Yeah." Rowan turned away from the grave, toward the future, toward life, toward everything waiting, ready. They walked back to the motorcycles, back to family, back to belonging. And Rowan understood that this was the ending, but also the beginning, because stories like this don't really end. They just transform, evolve, continue. She'd been the girl no one saw. Now she was the woman everyone noticed. Not because she was loud, not because she demanded attention, but because she'd survived, because she'd thrived, because she'd proven that being seen is the first step to being saved. And saving others is how you honor being saved yourself. Rowan climbed onto Cole's Harley, wrapped her arms around him, held on, not from fear, from gratitude, from love, from belonging. The engine roared to life, the formation moved, and Rowan rode into whatever came next. Not running from the past, not hiding from demons, just riding, living, being. Being Rowan, being enough, being free. The girl no one saw had become the woman everyone remembered. The homeless teenager had become the EMT who saved lives. The victim had become the survivor who proved that hope exists. That family is chosen. That brotherhood is real. That being seen changes everything. And somewhere in Cincinnati, on a frozen sidewalk outside Riverside Roastery, a plaque remained, bronze and permanent, reminding everyone who passed that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they look like someone everyone else stops seeing. Sometimes they look like someone who refused to walk past. Sometimes they look like Rowan Quinn. The end. But also the beginning. Because every person Rowan saves, every life she touches, every time she chooses to act instead of watch, the story continues, ripples outward, proves that one person can change everything. All you have to do is show up. All you have to do is care. All you have to do is be the one who doesn't walk away. Be someone's Hell's Angels. Be the person who gives their jacket. Be the one who mobilizes an army. Be the one who sees. Be the one who acts. Be the one who saves. Because somewhere right now, there's another Rowan, sitting outside another coffee shop, wondering if anyone will ever see her, if anyone will ever fight for her, if she matters enough to be saved. She does. You do. We all do. And the ending is this, Rowan wearing her EMT uniform, responding to calls, saving lives, proving that being saved means you save others. That hope is real. That family is chosen. That love is action. That protection is sacred. That seeing someone changes everything. The girl no one saw became the woman who sees everyone. And that's the story. That's the truth. That's what happens when someone finally looks. Subscribe, share, speak up. Be the person who doesn't walk past. Be someone's Hell's Angels. Be the one who sees. Be the difference. Be the hope. Be the proof that heroes exist. They do. They're everywhere. Sometimes they wear leather. Sometimes they wear badges. Sometimes they're just regular people who choose courage over comfort, who choose action over observation, who choose to see instead of looking away. Be that person. Be Rowan's army. Be the one who shows up, because that's all it takes, just showing up, just caring, just refusing to walk past suffering. That's how you change the world, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one moment at a time. And Rowan Quinn is proof, living proof, breathing proof, thriving proof that being seen saves lives, that chosen family is real, that hope exists, that love wins, that good people still exist, that protection is sacred, that brotherhood means something, that you matter, that we all matter, that being seen is the first step to being saved. Always, forever, amen.